chugga, 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 chugga. Woo, woo, chugga, 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 chugga. We've all heard that sound at one point or another. Most of us will say we've been on a train at one point or another. For many of us, our favorite childhood story was The Little Engine That Could. The Little Engine That Could is a tremendous children's story because it really gives children a basis from which for the rest of their lives they can understand that they can do anything that they set their mind to. My daughter loves Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas the Tank Engine has brought a whole new craze of trains to American children. But that's not what I'm talking about today. Thomas is friendly. Thomas goes, woo, woo. I'm going to tell you some folk tales. I'm going to tell you 2 folk tales. But first, I want to tell you about a fictional train. So I'm going to break all the rules in the book. It's my hubris that allows me to do this. But first I want to tell you about a fictional train. Charlie. Charlie is a main character in a series of stories by Stephen King that was a trilogy that he now has 4 and 5 books that began with The Gunslinger, the Dark Tower series. And in the middle of, I was reading these avidly. Who in here has read the Tolkien trilogy at some point in their life? Okay, some of you have, some of you have not. For those who have, or anybody who's read a story that just pulled you in and you could not put this thing down because you were so engrossed in the story. For me, the Dark Tower series was that kind of story. And it went on for book after book. And then Stephen King was hit by a van as he was walking alongside a road. And he was in a coma and he was all tore up and nobody. And my biggest concern was, but they got to get off Charlie. Because the gunslinger and his traveling companions were on an evil train. An evil train that had an evil laugh and had them controlled and bound and locked in as it raced through the night, asking them to give him a riddle. Charlie wanted a riddle. Charlie the train said, give me a riddle. And he laughed at them when their riddles he could understand really quickly. Now this is a fictional train, which has nothing to do with folktale at all. But Charlie embodies for me the idea of a scary train. I want to tell you about 2 scary train stories that are not about scary trains at all. That they're about people who are on trains or near trains. But the thing that ties these 2 stories together is that they are West Virginia folklore. And the first story is the story of Screaming Jennie. You might understand why I liked this story. Screaming Jennie. In 1833, when they completed all of the connections for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, they had a lot of leftover storage sheds from where the workers had lived while they were completing it. And these sheds were simply abandoned. And so many times people came in, poor people, people who had nowhere else to live. And they lived in these little shacks near the railroad. In 1833, there was a woman. And all we know about her is her name was Jennie. She was destitute. The accounts are she was kind. She shared what little she had, but she didn't have anything. She never had enough to eat. And when it was cold, she was cold. And when it was hot, she was hot. And she was in one of these little shacks one night, huddled over her little fire, trying to stay warm, eating a bowl of broth. And a spark from the fire caught onto her skirt. And she was so engrossed in the fact that she actually had broth to eat because she had been so hungry that she didn't notice that the heavy wool of her skirt had caught fire. She didn't realize it until because wool will smolder. So the sparks smoldered. So she didn't realize, there was not a flame at first. It smoldered its way through until finally the heat reached her legs. And at this point, she jumped up and she ran out of the shack, screaming, trying to get help. And she ran toward the engineer's shack, right next to the train tracks, trying to get some help. Well, of course, the movement of her running was fanning air, and so the smoldering skirt became a flaming skirt, and the flames crept up, and the woman was completely engulfed in flames. And she ran screaming, pitifully screaming, horribly screaming, onto the track, where an oncoming train hit her, mowed her down. People came running, and her body was still on fire after the train had hit it, and they had to put her out. And they brought her in, and they buried her in a pauper's grave. And within a week, another poor family had moved into that shack. And no one thought about Jennie again for about a month. One night, choo, 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 an engineer on the track coming toward the spot where Jennie had been killed suddenly put on his brakes because he saw before him a flaming person running toward him on the track. He put the brakes on. He was terrified. He knew he hit someone. And when the train came to a stop, he jumped out of the train and he ran to the back and found nothing. Over the years since 1833, many engineers have reported seeing a screaming fireman, hearing the screams, seeing a woman engulfed in flames running up the track toward the train. This happened near Harper's Ferry. Well, that's a little far away from Morgantown. Let's talk about another scary train story that happened a little closer to home in Fairmont, West Virginia.